Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important topics. Today being the 26th of November, India marks this day as Constitution Day or Samvidhan Divas. So as a result, we have a number of important articles related to the Indian Constitution. So let's examine all these topics in complete detail so that we don't leave behind any important article in the newspaper. We have a number of small prelims related articles as well, which we are going to cover in today's analysis. So if you guys are benefiting from our initiatives, do support us with your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start, I have a very important announcement. If you are an IAS aspirant preparing for the 2026 or 2027 attempt, then Unacademy has a great offer for you. We are launching a 2-year and 3-year subscription program to help those aspirants to realize their IAS dream. The Ignite batch in English medium is all set to begin from 29th November with polity classes being taken by Sarmad Mehraj sir. Similarly, there are batches in Hindi and bilingual medium as well, and this entire program will be available at just 32,999 for a 2-year plus subscription. The same for a 3-year plus subscription would be 42,999. You can upgrade to the iconic program, which will give you access to study material along with one-on-one mentorship by paying this particular price. Now, the best part of the program is that we assure to assist you to clear this exam. And worst case, if you don't, you will get access to CSE Assure plan, where you take a 24-month subscription and above. And in case you don't clear the exam, we will give a 1-year free extension. That is the guarantee that we provide. Because we are confident that this program should be more than sufficient to help you clear this exam. And worst case, if you don't, we will provide a 1-year extension on your subscription. So if you're interested, do enroll for these classes, which are beginning very soon, by clicking on the link provided in the video description. So let's get started with the discussion and look at the first topic, Constitution Day. As I mentioned, today, 26th of November, is a historic day for India. On this day, back in 1949, the Constitution of India was adopted by the Constituent Assembly. After becoming independent from centuries of colonial rule and exploitation, finally, independent India brought out its constitution drafted by the Constituent Assembly, and it was adopted by the Constituent Assembly. So the credit goes to India's constitution makers, including the chairman of the drafting committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So the constitution enshrines the cherished principles from equality to liberty to fraternity to the fundamental rights and the directive principles, and defines the center-state relations and establishes an independent judiciary. It is this sacred document which provides for India to be a thriving democracy today. So to pay tribute to this historic day, the Modi government in 2015 designated 26th November as Constitution Day, also celebrated as Samvidhan Divas. So this year marks the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Indian Constitution. So as a result, the Modi government has planned a series of events to celebrate this historic day. And in fact, the President of India, Draupadi Murmu, has called for a joint sitting of the Parliament, where both the houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, would be assembled today by the President for an elaborate discussion on the Indian Constitution and the future course of India. So this constitution, which was adopted on 26 November 1949, finally took effect on 26 January 1950, which we mark as Republic Day, as India became a republic starting from 26 January 1950. So in this context, it is very important to look at the articles in today's newspaper that are related to the Indian Constitution. On page number 8, we have a column written by none other than Shashi Tharoor, the leader, one of the leaders of the opposition, an eminent intellectual from India, goes on to talk about the Indian Constitution in great detail. Shashi Tharoor is of the opinion that the Indian Constitution has thrived despite all the challenges it has faced, and it can show the way forward for India in the coming decades as well. So let's dive deep into this article and understand what Shashi Tharoor is trying to highlight. As I told you, the President of India has called for a joint sitting of the House. Now, can you find out under which article of the Constitution do we have a provision for joint sitting of the Parliament? Please find out which article in the Constitution provides for this provision where the President can summon a joint sitting of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha on special occasions. Today is indeed a special occasion. It marks the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Indian Constitution. To mark this day, the President has conferred for a joint sitting, and it has even triggered a controversy between the ruling benches and the opposition benches regarding the speakers who will be given an opportunity to speak and address the joint session. A controversy has broken out, a political controversy between the government and the opposition. So in this context, Shashi Tharoor points out that the speakers at the joint sitting will make these congratulatory speeches, trying to claim victory for themselves, for their parties, trying to highlight their own achievements. But on this historic day, what we really need to remember would be the historic speeches delivered by none other than Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar, as the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution, delivered two very, very important speeches which we need to remember on this day. On the eve of the adoption of the Constitution, on 25th November 1949, just a day before the Constitution was adopted by the Constituent Assembly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar delivered a historic speech, and he said something which reverberates even today. It has relevance and significance till this day. Dr. Ambedkar said, no matter how bad a constitution is, at the end of the day, it's about the people and the political parties which are going to implement and enforce the constitution. Even a bad constitution can work very well if the people and the parties have a good intention. And the converse is also true. Even if you have the best possible constitution in the world, it can be ruined by a bad set of people and a bad set of political parties. This is exactly what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar highlighted in his historic speech on 25th November 1949. Dr. Ambedkar said, and I quote, "However good a constitution may be, it is sure to turn out bad because those who are called to work it, that is to implement it, happen to be a bad lot." This was a reference to not just the people of the country, but mainly the political parties and the politicians who will play a critical role in implementing the constitution. Ambedkar went on to say, however bad a constitution may be, it may turn out to be good if those who are called to work it happen to be a good lot. Now, what do you think about this statement about Ambedkar? Let me know in the comments. Do you think this is true and valid? Can a bad constitution become a good constitution if those who are implementing it are good? And conversely, can a good constitution become bad if those who are implementing it are a bad lot? Let me know in the comments. The other important speech by Dr. Ambedkar was delivered on the first Republic Day of India, 26 January 1950, when the Constitution of India took effect. This historic speech is very, very relevant because Dr. Ambedkar identified the lacunas, the gaps present in the Indian society, which according to him could threaten the Constitution and probably could weaken the Constitution. In this historic speech, Dr. Ambedkar identified the two major gaps in Indian society, the socio-economic lacunas present in our society, which could pose a threat to the very foundation of the Constitution and weaken our Constitution. This was a message, a warning by the chairman of the drafting committee. According to Dr. Ambedkar, the two biggest weakness in Indian society happens to be equality and fraternity. Now look at the irony of this. Look at the contradiction here. The Constitution, as you all know, the Constitution of India guarantees equality to all. The term equality finds a mention in the preamble itself, and it also finds a mention under fundamental rights. Equality is a guaranteed fundamental right. From Article 14 to 17, right to equality is enshrined as a fundamental right. It ensures that the law of the land is supreme, rule of law is supreme, and everybody is treated equally, irrespective of your caste, your religion, your place of birth, your gender. The state is prohibited from any kind of discrimination apart from few reasonable restrictions, and it abolishes untouchability, provides for equal treatment in education, in public employment, etc. Even though these constitutional principles are enshrined, and even though India has been set up as a political democracy with the principle of equality in mind, the question raised by Ambedkar was, are we really a social democracy? Politically, we might be a democracy with the principle of equality. The Constitution says there is equality. But socially, are we really equal? This was the critical question raised by Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar said in this historic speech that Constitution guarantees equal rights to everyone. One person, one vote, one value. Every individual, every citizen in the country has an equal vote, an equal right, and an equal value. But is this true in our society? The answer is no. The answer was no in 1950. Even today, the answer is no. Why? Because there are socio-economic inequalities in our society. The Constitution might have guaranteed political equality as a guaranteed fundamental right, but socially, economically, we remain unequal. This was a very valid, deep insight that was raised by Dr. Ambedkar. And I think it's a very, very important argument that was made by Dr. Ambedkar. According to Dr. Ambedkar, given the divisions in our society, the religion-based division, the caste-based division, caste has been the bane of Indian society. The economic inequalities present in our society. This ensures that the principle of one man, one value is denied in the society. So Dr. Ambedkar gave a warning to all of us that Constitution might have given political democracy, but this Constitution is useless if we do not become a social democracy, because that is what will guarantee the right to equality. I hope this point is clear. The next important gap or lacuna identified by Ambedkar was the lack of fraternity in Indian society. See, again, fraternity finds a mention in the preamble to the Indian Constitution. Now, what do you mean by fraternity? Fraternity is about a sense of brotherhood, a sense of belongingness to a certain national identity. We all associate ourselves as Indians. We feel proud that we are from this land. We feel proud of our rich cultural heritage, our civilizational heritage, our freedom struggle, the principles that our freedom fighters stood for. And we definitely feel proud about our Constitution and its principles. But the point is, politically, we might be promoting fraternity, but are we truly fraternal? Do we really have a sense of brotherhood socially and economically? Do we all care about the poor people? Do we all care about the Dalits, the scheduled tribes, the backward classes, the minority communities? That is what you mean by true fraternity. And according to Ambedkar, there is an absence of fraternity in Indian society. So constitutionally, politically, we might promote fraternity, but it has no meaning, no value unless and until we practice this in our society. Fraternity or brotherhood is not just when we watch a cricket match. All of us from Tamil Nadu to Kashmir, from Arunachal to Gujarat, all of us will root for India. If there is a security threat from China or Pakistan, all of us will unite to show our patriotism and stand together as a nation. But that alone is not fraternity. That alone is not enough to keep the nation together. You need social fraternity. Do we care about the weaker classes in the society? Do we have concern about the Dalits, the lower castes, who have been treated as untouchables for centuries, who have been humiliated, oppressed for centuries? Do we care about the minorities in the country? Do we care about the poor and the weaker classes, the vulnerable section? That is what you mean by true brotherhood. You need to uplift each other. You need to care about each other. That is when the true spirit of fraternity will be promoted in the society. Now, you tell me, don't you think this was a critical point raised by Dr. Ambedkar? He was talking about the weakness in Indian society created by the divisions, the internal social divisions. So that is why, according to Ambedkar, the two biggest weakness in Indian society is the lack of equality and the lack of fraternity. Politically, constitutionally, we might have guaranteed equality and fraternity in the preamble, in the fundamental rights. But the question he raised in this historic speech was, are we really equal and fraternal? Unless and until we transition into a social democracy, our constitution would not have served its entire purpose. This was a critical argument raised by Dr. Ambedkar. Now look at how the question of caste has been politicized by our political parties. See, one of the hallmark features of Indian constitution was that it abolished untouchability. Abolition of untouchability was guaranteed as a fundamental right to ensure the upliftment of the Dalits. Reasonable restrictions were added under Article 15 and 16 under right to equality to provide for affirmative action, which we popularly refer to as the policy of reservation or the quota system, to uplift the socially backward classes. These are great provisions of the Indian Constitution, which allowed India to remain together. But the point is, have we really overcome the caste-based divisions? Affirmative action or policy of reservation was supposed to be a temporary feature of the Constitution, and this has been stressed upon by Dr. Ambedkar himself. But this has been politicized. Political parties have created a vote bank out of the policy of reservation, and reservation has been extended to many other backward classes as well. And today reservation has become entrenched, and that deeply ingrains the caste system and the caste divisions in our society. Today there is a demand for a caste census to identify the truly backward classes, so that only the backward classes can get the benefits of reservation. But there is resistance by certain sections of Indian polity. Few political parties are opposed to a caste census, right? Because they would like to continue the politicization of quota system. Because if you look at the quota system, how it has been implemented, very few sections of Indian society have benefited from it. If you look at scheduled castes and scheduled tribes or even OBCs, only the top elite creamy layer have repeatedly benefited from reservation, leaving behind many backward classes even within SCs, STs and OBCs. The truly backward classes, which are socially, educationally backward, they haven't really drawn the benefits of reservation, but only few sections have cornered it and built political power base based on that. This political link with reservation, the politicization of reservation and the entrenchment of caste has deeply divided our society, polarized our society. So have we really overcome the divisions which Ambedkar had warned us about? That is what we need to explore. That is what we need to discuss on this historic day. It's not about which party did what. It's not about what is the achievement of political leaders. It's about, have we truly followed our constitution in spirit? This critical question is raised by Shashi Tharoor in this insightful article, and I feel this discussion will be very, very helpful for you to answer your polity questions or even to write an essay on a related topic. Now, please take up this practice question. Dr. Ambedkar highlighted the fact that there is complete absence of two things in Indian society, equality and fraternity. So that is a statement which has been given to you. The question says, according to him, these two lacunas in the Indian society could weaken the constitution. Elaborate. So let me give you a basic structure as to how you can approach answer writing to this question. Then I would expect you to use the points that we have discussed to write an answer, and please post your answers in the comments so it can help other students as well. So for this particular question, a good introduction would be the speech of Dr. Ambedkar delivered on 26 January 1950. Because that is where the statement has been directly lifted from. It's on this historic day when India became a republic that Dr. Ambedkar pointed out the two biggest weaknesses in Indian society, the lack of equality and fraternity, which could end up weakening the Indian constitution and Indian democracy. So bring out this speech of Dr. Ambedkar, make a reference to it so that you can show to the evaluator that you have knowledge about the development of the Indian constitution. And in the body, you can illustrate what Ambedkar meant by lack of equality. You can show the difference between a social democracy versus a political democracy. You can point out that the Constitution guarantees equality and fraternity in the Preamble and fundamental rights. You can quote those articles and provisions as well. That makes us a political democracy. But are we a social democracy? That is the question Ambedkar was raising through this statement. You can illustrate the lack of equality in Indian society. You can talk about the lack of fraternity which persists even today. Give some examples to justify your argument, such as how the caste system remains entrenched in the Indian society, how the quota system has been politically misused. Give some examples on these lines to substantiate your argument, how this could end up weakening the Indian democracy and the Indian constitution. Then conclude your answer with a way forward. You can conclude by stating that we should strive to be a social democracy, not just a political democracy. On these lines, you can bring your answer to a conclusion. So that would be the broad structure that one should follow to write a good answer to this question. Now let's see how many of you can do this. And I will personally go through your answers as well if you comment your answers in the comment section. Now let's look at another article on the same page, again related to the Indian Constitution. This is another interesting and insightful article. See, whenever we refer to the Constitution of India, the framing of the Indian Constitution by the Constituent Assembly, we often refer to the members of Constituent Assembly as the founding fathers of India. Correct? We all use this term. Even I have used this term many times in the class. But let me tell you why this term is exclusionary. It excludes an entire section. It excludes the women who played a stellar role in the framing, drafting and adoption of the Indian Constitution, whom we should be referring to as the founding mothers of the Indian Constitution. The writer correctly points out that patriarchy in the Indian society is clearly evident when we all refer to the founding fathers of Indian Constitution and exclude the founding mothers of the Indian Constitution. I am sure many of us can name the key members of Constituent Assembly, the male members of the Constituent Assembly. Whereas, how many of us can name the female members of the Constituent Assembly who made a stellar contribution to the Indian Constitution? That is what the article is about. This article, written by Faisal CK, the Deputy Law Secretary to the Government of Kerala, focuses on feminist ideology in India's constitutional discourse and highlights the contribution of the female members, the women members of the Constituent Assembly. So let's dive a little deep into this article, because again, it's a very insightful article. You'll not find these points anywhere else in any standard textbooks. This is where you'll get those key points. So don't think newspaper is just about current affairs. Newspaper will also help you in your static portion, in history, in getting your facts correct. That's why newspaper reading and analysis is extremely important for this exam. So according to the writer, the women members of the Constituent Assembly and in general the women of the country, they not only accepted and consented to the Constitution, they also played a pivotal role in expressing their will in the drafting of the Indian Constitution. Don't think that the women members of the Constituent Assembly, they simply nodded and agreed to whatever the male members were recommending. Don't think that the women of the country, they just accepted the Constitution and gave consent to it. No, they played a pivotal role in its drafting itself. The women of India played a very critical role in our freedom struggle. gave leadership to our freedom struggle against the British rule, and eventually played a stellar role in the drafting of the Indian Constitution as well. So let's explore this role of Indian women, particularly some eminent personalities, a few women members of the Constituent Assembly who made a big contribution to the Indian Constitution. Because see, a very popular author, Christian Keating, writes in the book, which was published in 2007, and points out an inherent contradiction in the Indian Constitution and in the Indian society. The Indian Constitution might have guaranteed equal rights to women. Correct? Because right to equality clearly states that there can't be any discrimination on the basis of gender. So one might argue that India is truly equal, that women have been provided with equal rights. Correct. Technically, that is correct. But the point is, the very same Constituent Assembly which gave us fundamental rights, which gave us right to equality, which ended the discrimination against women, also gave us sanction to religious practices and personal laws which could threaten the independence of women. Do you agree with this assessment of Christian Keating in the book, which was published in 2007? The author argues that the same Constituent Assembly which gave us all the fundamental rights and right to equality and ended the discrimination against women also gave us sanction to certain religious practices and personal laws which would end up curbing the rights of women. Now, for example, look at the right to practice and profess religion. Eventually, orthodox religious practices, they are inherently anti-women. There is a patriarchal nature to it. In any religion for that matter, you find that certain customs, certain traditions, right? They end up being conservative. They end up discriminating against women in some form or the other. They end up curbing the rights of women in some form or the other. The personal laws and the family system seen in the Indian society ends up promoting orthodox conservative values which could curb women's rights and weaken gender rights. Look at the role expected by women in a family. Women are expected to be the caregivers, to look after the elders, to look after the children, to cook food, to do all the household chores. Whereas this burden is not placed on the men in the family, and this is a societal problem. It's a societal problem seen not only in India but around the world, because we do live in a patriarchal world, a male-dominated world. And the Constitution, in a way, gives sanction to that. How? By allowing for personal laws, by allowing for practice of religion, freedom of religion. And some of the members of Constituent Assembly, the women members, they had raised some objections about these provisions. For example, if you look at Amrit Kaur. Amrit Kaur was a key member of the Constituent Assembly, and she raised a very, very critical point. She pointed out that women of India were no longer willing to submit to the standards laid down by the society, which is driven by the male perspective. In a patriarchal society, whatever values are followed in a society, it comes to the male perspective. And Amrit Kaur rejected this back in 1932 itself. Much before India's independence, Amrit Kaur, who would be considered as one of the founding mothers of the Indian Constitution, would highlight this point that women are being forced to follow the male standards laid down for society. Eventually, Amrit Kaur and even Hansa Mehta, please write down these names. Amrit Kaur and Hansa Mehta, as key members of Constituent Assembly, they would openly raise their voice in the Constituent Assembly debates when question about women's rights would come up, when question of equality and freedom of religion would come up. Hansa Mehta and Amrit Kaur, they pointed out the patriarchal nature of the society, and they argued that Uniform Civil Code, the UCC, should be enshrined as a fundamental right in the Indian Constitution. A uniform civil code would have ensured that religion-based personal laws would be cast aside and religion-based orthodoxy would not discriminate against women. Now, be it marriage, be it divorce, adoption, inheritance of property, etc. With regard to all these personal issues, family-related issues, which are civil matters, there are religious codes, personal laws which are enabled by the Constitution of India, right, in the name of secularism. But however, this ends up weakening women's rights, gender rights, and this was actively raised by Hansa Mehta, Amrit Kaur. They argued for uniform civil code to be recognized as a fundamental right. But eventually, as you all know, a compromise was struck. The male members of Constituent Assembly, who were obviously driven by a patriarchal mindset, they had to appease the male section of the Indian society as well. So they ended up including the UCC not as a fundamental right, but as just a DPSP, as a directive principle of state policy. Now, can you let me know in the comments, under which article has UCC been included in the Constitution under directive principles? Imagine if this were to be made a fundamental right as argued by Hansa Mehta and Amrit Kaur. This would have played a pivotal role in guaranteeing equality to women. It would have freed women from religious domination and societal subjugation. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. But however, Hansa Mehta and Amrit Kaur ensured that they added a prelude to the directive principles. You might have studied under directive principles that at the beginning of this chapter on directive principles of state policy, there is a statement which is added. What does it read? The prelude to DPSP reads that directive principles are fundamental in the governance of the country, and the state has a duty to apply the directive principles while making laws. You would have studied about directive principles that it is not enforceable, it is not justiciable in a court, unlike fundamental rights. But however, directive principles are like a guide. It is a guide to the governance of the country, how the country should be governed. It is a basis for the government to make laws. Whatever law is brought out by the parliament through the government eventually should be based on directive principles. It should fulfill the directive principles enshrined in the Constitution. This critical prelude to the DPSP was added because of the voice that was raised by the women members of Constituent Assembly, Hansa Mehta and Amrit Kaur. That is a stellar contribution of these members of Constituent Assembly, whom we often do not recognize. The Constitution is now very clear that directive principles are like a guide to the government. It is fundamental to the governance of this country, and whatever laws are made by the state, they should fulfill the directive principles. So uniform civil code should have been fulfilled for an egalitarian society, but till date it remains a controversial, debatable topic. Of course, there is another side to the argument with regard to secularism and rights of religious communities as well. But we are definitely looking at the other side of the argument, which is equally valid. Another important member of Constituent Assembly, Begum Aizaz Rasool, she praised the principle of secularism, which was inherent to the Indian Constitution. See, the initial version of the Indian Constitution did not explicitly mention the word secularism anywhere in the Constitution. But inherently, the Constitution was always secular. And Begum Aizaz Rasool, a woman member of the Constituent Assembly, articulated her view about secularism. She praised the value of secularism, which would guarantee equal treatment to all religions. But however, she raised concern as well, which was supported by Hansa Mehta. Both the women members pointed out that if freedom of religion is granted without some restrictions, this could end up curbing women's rights. Because some of the abhorrent practices in our Indian society have been an outcome of orthodox religion, misinterpreted religion. For example, look at the practice of parda, the burqa system or talaq, which is seen as part of Islam. Look at practices like sati, the treatment of widows in the Hindu society. Or look at the practice of child marriage. Or even look at the Devdasi system, where a girl child would be given off in the name of faith, in the name of religion, and pushed into prostitution. These were social evils in the Indian society, which was a result of misinterpretation, misuse of religion. Certain orthodox religious practices would give rise to these social evils, which would hurt women's rights. Their equality and dignity was compromised because of these practices. So, Hansa Mehta, Begum, Aizaz Rasool and Amrit Kaur, they had a valid point that if you are going to guarantee freedom of religion as a fundamental right, if there are no restrictions on it, then it would enable the subjugation of women. It would continue these social evils, and even worse, it could allow future generations to even revoke previous laws retrospectively. The British had prohibited sati, abolished sati through a law. Dowry had been prohibited. Child marriage had been prohibited. Widow remarriage had been encouraged. So, these laws could also be undone by the future generations if complete freedom of religion was granted. These were critical points raised by the women members. Another important member, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, pointed out that the constitution heralded a new beginning for women as it guaranteed equality and justice. Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay genuinely believed that the Indian constitution would lead to the emancipation of women and the upliftment of Indian women. But studies have shown that we haven't really achieved our constitutional objective. In 1974, the government itself brought out a report called Towards Equality. It pointed out the status of women in India. And according to this government report, even after 2 decades after implementing the constitution, we were nowhere close to uplifting and empowering our women. Even today, women in the country face a number of challenges. They face a lot of discrimination because of the patriarchal nature of the society, because of the orthodox religious practices and conservative values driven from a male perspective. So that is something we need to look at and appreciate by looking at this article. So please remember these names, the founding mothers of Indian Constitution. We always talk about the founding fathers, from Ambedkar to others. So let's remember the founding mothers as well, Amrit Kaur, Hansa Mehta, Begum, Aizaz Rasool and the others, including Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay. So that is what we learn from this important column. Now let's see what kind of question can be given. The fact that the founding mothers of the Indian Republic too painstakingly co-authored the Constitution of India has been brushed over. Discuss. So let's see if you guys can write an answer to this question based on what we have discussed. And please write your answers in the comments. As I told you, I'll try to take a look at your answers, and that would help other students as well. Now moving on the eve of Constitution Day, the Supreme Court of India has passed a historic judgment. The Supreme Court has delivered a historic verdict with regard to secularism and socialism, which are integral features of the Indian Constitution. And this historic judgment coincidentally comes on the eve of Constitution Day, the 75th anniversary of the adoption of Indian Constitution. So let's discuss this topic quickly, then we will move on to the prelim section. See, if you look at the original Constitution, if you let's say look at the draft Constitution, which was finalized by November 1949, the Constituent Assembly had finalized the draft. Or if you look at the Constitution that was adopted on 26th November 1949, these versions of the Constitution of India did not explicitly mention the term secularism or socialism. These terms were not explicitly mentioned. Then how do you find it in the preamble? I'm sure anyone familiar with the preamble to the Indian Constitution would have come across the term socialist and secular, that we the people of India solemnly resolve to constitute India as a democratic, secular, socialist republic. These two terms were added later through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976, which was enacted during the emergency period under the Indira Gandhi government. This constitutional amendment, which has often been referred to as a mini constitution because it carried out many changes to the constitution during emergency, which was the darkest period in Indian democracy, for which then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was held directly responsible. There has been a lot of criticism against the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. Some of the harmful changes which were done, they were reversed and undone through the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act and subsequent amendments to the Constitution. Now, this controversial constitutional amendment, the 42nd Amendment, introduced the words secular and socialist. Now, this has been a point of controversy, political controversy. In 2020, a batch of petitions were filed at the Supreme Court, challenging the inclusion of these words, socialist and secular, which was not found in the original constitution. This petition was led by Dr. Subramaniam Swamy, a popular lawyer, activist, and as well as a political leader. I'm sure many of you would be familiar with Dr. Subramaniam Swamy. So he, along with a bunch of petitioners, approached the Supreme Court challenging the inclusion of the words secular and socialist, and they argued that this amendment had done a disservice to the Indian Constitution. They said this is a fraud committed on the Indian Constitution because the original Constitution never included the terms, but it was added later through the 42nd Amendment Act, that too during a period of emergency when democracy had been wiped out by then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Now, the Supreme Court went into this debate and it has examined this issue at great detail, and it has finally delivered a historic verdict. The Supreme Court bench, which was headed by Chief Justice of India Sanjeev Khanna, has pointed out that the petitioners do not have a strong argument. The Supreme Court has raised questions about the petitioners and the question they have raised. The Supreme Court has said there is no merit in the argument of the petitioners, which requires a detailed examination of the issue. Meaning the Supreme Court believes this is a waste of time of the court to evaluate whether India is a socialist country, whether India is a secular country or not. Because according to the Supreme Court, these are inherent features of the Indian Constitution and Indian polity, whether the term is explicitly mentioned or not. What do you mean by secular? Western interpretation is that there is a clear separation between the church and the state. But the Indian version of secularism, which was ingrained into the Indian Constitution, believes in equal treatment of all religions, where the state will treat all religions equally and fairly. Right? Socialism refers to elimination of all types of exploitation, be it social exploitation, economic exploitation, or political exploitation. Eliminating all forms of exploitation is an inherent feature of the Indian Constitution. In fact, various rulings of Supreme Court has clearly established that these terms are part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Whether it was mentioned explicitly or not in the draft Constitution and in the original Constitution doesn't matter. It was added later by using the amending powers of the Parliament under Article 368, and it continues to remain an integral feature of the Constitution and remains a part of the basic structure according to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has argued that the preamble can be amended. It is a part of the Indian Constitution. There are historic rulings of the past where Supreme Court has repeatedly stated preamble is very much a part of the Constitution, and preamble can also be amended under the amending powers of the Parliament under Article 368, and it can have a retrospective effect, meaning you can backdate the amendments. This was one of the questions raised by the petitioners led by Dr. Subramaniam Swamy. Dr. Subramaniam Swamy argued that by including these terms in 1976, a fraud was being committed because, according to Subramaniam Swamy, Parliament doesn't have the power to amend the preamble retrospectively. But Supreme Court has dismissed this argument and has even raised question about the intention and motives of the petitioners. Supreme Court has questioned, why are you raising this question after 4 decades? Whether this was added in 1976 or not doesn't matter. India was always socialist and secular, according to the Supreme Court. Secularism has been an inherent feature of the Indian Constitution. It treats all religions equally fairly. It provides for elimination of all forms of exploitation, social, economic and political, which makes India a socialist republic. So Supreme Court has upheld the validity of the inclusion of these terms in the preamble. It has upheld the amending powers of the parliament under Article 368 to amend the preamble, because preamble is as much part of the constitution. And it has also said it can have a retrospective effect. Parliament can amend the constitution with retrospective effect. And that essentially dismisses the petition raised by Dr. Subramaniam Swamy, and Supreme Court has upheld the values of socialism and secularism and interpreted this as part of the basic structure of the Constitution. Now coming to the prelim section, let's quickly take a look at the smaller articles which can be important for your prelims. On the front page, we have an article that refers to the Global Treaty on Plastics, which is being negotiated. See, recently the climate change summit has concluded at Baku in Azerbaijan. We have covered that in our discussion as well. So the Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has ended. And immediately there is another important environment related summit which is going to be held in Bhutan. Now can you guys tell me, the city of Bhutan is located in which country? Any idea? Because this is where the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, INC, on Global Treaty on Plastics of the United Nations is going to meet to work out a treaty on dealing with plastics. So can you guys tell me in the comments, in which country is the summit being held? It's being held in the city of Bhutan. So can you tell me, where is Bhutan located, in which country? Anyone? Can we see the comments? Very good. South Korea. South Korea is hosting the 5th Intergovernmental Negotiations Committee of the United Nations, which is trying to work out a global treaty on plastics. So this is part of a process which began a few years ago. In 2021-2022, the United Nations committed to tackle the problem created by plastic pollution and to eliminate plastic gradually. So all the countries came together, around 170 plus countries of the UN have come together to establish a INC, Intergovernmental Negotiations Committee, and they have been negotiating a global treaty on plastics. Till date, 4 summits have already taken place. The first summit was held in Uruguay, in Punta del Este, in Uruguay, in South America. The second summit took place in Paris, in France. The third summit was in Nairobi, Kenya. And recently, the 4th summit was held this year in Ottawa, Canada. Please remember the 4 locations where the Summit on Plastics, the INC, Intergovernmental Negotiations Committee, has met to work out the UN Treaty on Plastics. Now the 5th edition of the summit is being held at Busan in South Korea. There is a lot of hope that a final treaty might emerge, a final treaty might come out. Because see, if the world doesn't have time, we are running out of time. If you look at Climate Change Convention, we took many years and summits to bring out the Paris Agreement. The Climate Change Convention was set up in 1990s after the Rio Earth Summit. It took us more than 2 decades and more than 20 Conference of Parties to arrive at the Paris Agreement, which has finally brought out an agreement on reducing emissions and moving away from fossil fuels. But we don't have that luxury to wait anymore with regard to plastics. Plastics are equally detrimental to our environment. Plastics are everywhere today. Microplastics have entered the water stream. They are found in our seas and oceans and rivers and groundwater. They've entered the bloodstream. They've entered the food chain. They're posing a serious threat to marine organisms. So it is extremely critical to work out a global treaty on plastics, which will help in getting rid of plastics, which can promote the management of plastic waste, which can help in phasing out plastics. Because see, plastic right now is critical to the industry, to the economy. Almost every sector, from automobiles to electronics to MSME, cottage industries, every industry is dependent on plastics, and we haven't really used other environment-friendly alternatives. So you can't impose an overnight ban. you need to gradually phase out plastics and adopt safer alternatives. But of course, some countries have banned single-use plastic. Like India, for example. India has banned single-use plastic, right? Plastic which is used once and disposed, which leads to a big environmental hazard, has been banned in the country, and we are trying to enforce the ban. But other than that, different plastic polymers are widely used across different industries, and there is a need to move away from these plastics gradually. So without hurting the economy, because that will eventually hurt the weaker countries, the poor people, right? Without hurting the weaker sections, we need to gradually phase out plastics and move to safer alternatives. That is why we need this global treaty. So countries are meeting in Bhutan, South Korea to work out the UN Treaty on Plastics. But there is resistance from some countries, especially those countries which are major exporters of petrochemical products. Because eventually plastic polymers are a byproduct of the petroleum industry itself. So those countries which are major petroleum exporters, those countries which have a strong petro refinery base, right, which are major producers of plastic and consumers of plastic, they are having some objections because they know that a global treaty can hurt their economy and their interests. So because of this opposition by several countries, from United States, from India, from some European countries, from China, all these countries, even West Asian countries, they're all having their own reservations and objections, which is leading to a deadlock. And as a result, the earlier 4 summits have not yielded a final treaty. But the article here is hoping that the countries will come together in Busan and work out a final treaty, a global treaty on plastics to phase out plastics. So we will continue to track this summit. There will be more developments. We will discuss this again, but I've just given you the basic introduction. Next, on page 4, there's an article referring to an insurgent outfit from Assam known as ULFA, the United Liberation Front of Assam. This insurgent outfit was established in 1979 during the Assam agitation. Assam agitation was a set of widespread protests and riots that lasted from 1979 to 1985, where native Assamese, they opposed the illegal migration from Bangladesh. The large-scale illegal migration from Bangladesh and previously from East Pakistan had led to demographic changes in Assam, and the native Assamese felt threatened by the large entry of outsiders who were illegal migrants. And according to allegations, some of the illegal migrants got registered on the voters list, and effectively they were becoming voters in Indian elections, which would pave the way for them to become Indian citizens as well eventually. So this felt as a threat to the native Assamese. They felt their culture, their land could be threatened by the outsiders, and triggered the Assamese agitation, which was led by the Students' Union, the All Assam Students' Union. So as the protests were going on against the government for failing to curb illegal migration, parallelly some of the radical student leaders like Arvind Rajkova, Anup Chetia and Paresh Barua, these radical student leaders, they went on to establish a insurgent outfit and declared a separatist war against India and formed ULFA in 1979. Since then, it has been a notorious terrorist organization. It has carried out many attacks in Assam and across northeast India. India has designated ULFA as a terrorist organization under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. And it even took support in Bangladesh. Look at the hypocrisy of this. These radical insurgents were opposing illegal migrants from Bangladesh. Eventually, they themselves went to Bangladesh and found a safe haven because they were getting state support from Pakistan and its intelligence agency, the ISI, and as well as from a hostile government in Bangladesh. Insurgent groups like ULFA got support to train their cadres, to procure funds and arms and weapons, and to wage this separatist war against India. ULFA's objective was to break Assam from India and to liberate and to set up Assam as a separate nation. So ULFA has been fighting this insurgent war for several decades, and India has been tackling the threat by deploying Indian Army and Assam Rifles under the special powers of AFSPA. So until 2009, ULFA remained a major threat because it had a strong base in Bangladesh. It had ties with other insurgent groups as well, like Bodos, the Naga insurgent groups and others. But in 2009, when Sheikh Hasina became the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, when India got a friendly leader and a friendly government under Awami League, Bangladesh cooperated with India to destroy these terrorist safe havens, and the back of ULFA and other insurgents was broken by Bangladesh and India. Leaders of ULFA like Anup Chetia, Arvind Rajkova were arrested and extradited to India. They are in Indian custody right now. Currently, India is negotiating a peace accord with the main faction of ULFA. So ULFA now has been broken almost completely because its safe haven in Bangladesh was decimated by Bangladesh and India together in 2009-2010. However, there is one branch of ULFA called ULFA Independent or ULFA I, which is led by Paresh Barua. This faction remains active and it has set up a new base in Myanmar with reported support from Chinese intelligence agencies. According to Indian intelligence agencies, Paresh Barua, who continues to lead ULFA's insurgency with a new faction called ULFA I or ULFA Independent, this faction is reportedly operating somewhere along the China-Myanmar border. So India has extended the ban on ULFA for 5 more years. It was designated as a terrorist group in 1990. Since then, the organization has been banned by the Indian government and the ban has been extended because even though we are negotiating peace with the main faction, which has surrendered, there is another faction which continues to wage a war against India, which continues to carry out attacks in Northeast India. So that is why central government, the Home Ministry, has extended the ban on ULFA for 5 more years. Next, we have an article on page 13 referring to the Atal Innovation Mission. The Atal Innovation Mission was a flagship government scheme launched by the Modi government in 2016. In 2016, the Modi government launched Atal Innovation Mission to promote the culture of innovation, the spirit of entrepreneurship in the country. Since then, it has been implemented by the Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog is the implementing agency. It has been working with the industry, with research institutions and schools and colleges and universities to promote the culture of innovation and entrepreneurship and create an ecosystem for building entrepreneurs in the country. To ensure that our students who are in schools, colleges and higher education, they get enough exposure to the industry, they get enough opportunities at research and development. The idea is to collaborate with the industry and to bring the innovation ecosystem to the labs in schools and colleges, especially in higher education institutions, to cultivate the startup culture and give the support needed to mentor the future entrepreneurs and to promote innovation. So with this ambition, Niti Aayog has been implementing Atal Innovation Mission by setting up the Atal Tinkering Labs, the Atal Incubation Centers, the Arise Initiative for enabling small enterprises, etc., which is all part of Atal Innovation Mission. Now, this important scheme has been extended for the second version. The Union Cabinet has approved the second edition of Atal Innovation Mission or Atal Innovation Mission 2.0. The Union Cabinet has provided an enhanced allocation of 2,750 crores, which will be available until 2028 to continue the scheme which is being implemented by Niti Aayog. So that is the key development that you need to make a note of. It will promote the culture and ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship. It will bring our students closer to the industry, promote innovation. It will promote startup founders and startup ideas and innovative ideas will be mentored and incubated through industry leaders who are brought in by the Niti Aayog. So a massive allocation has been made for the second version of the program. It will continue till 2028 with the additional allocation of funds. Next, another important government scheme is in the news. One Nation, One Subscription. One Nation, One Subscription. Don't think this is for Netflix or Hotstar or Amazon Prime subscription. No. This is for accessing scientific papers, journals which are much needed for researchers and students in the country. See, right now, researchers and students, academicians, they have to subscribe to multiple journals and papers to get access to all the scientific research material. So Government of India is planning to simplify this. And the Union Cabinet has approved this centrally sponsored scheme. It is a centrally sponsored scheme, a brand new initiative called One Nation, One Subscription. Through this initiative, researchers and students and academicians across the country will get access, digital, simple, user-friendly access to all the research papers and scientific data brought out through government institutions, higher education institutions, and the research laboratories, the incubation centers which are run by the government, right, which are bringing out intellectual property. So all those papers and journals would be clubbed and made available on a single platform. And with just one subscription, students and researchers can access all the research material coming out of our higher education institutions and our research institutions. This will be implemented by InflibNet, Information and Library Network. It will be implemented over the next 2 to 3 years from 2025 to 2027. 6,000 crores has been allocated for this scheme to roll out One Nation, One Subscription, which can promote access to scientific journals. Next, India has hosted the Global Conference of International Cooperative Alliance. A couple of days ago, we had studied about the International Cooperative Alliance that brings together the cooperative societies from around the world. As you know, cooperative societies play a critical role in grassroots movement, especially in helping agriculture, in benefiting farmers, in supporting the rural economy, in supporting the native economy. Look at India's dairy industry, look at the silk industry, the textile industry. Most of it is built on cooperatives. India is home to more than 8 lakh cooperative societies. They pioneer in microfinance. They pioneer in community-led initiatives to transform the economy, to create jobs, to create livelihood opportunities. So India is also a member of the International Cooperative Alliance, and for the first time, we have hosted the global conference, which was inaugurated by Prime Minister Modi. So PM Modi has addressed the gathering where representatives from several countries were present, with hundreds of cooperatives from around the world participating. He highlighted the role of cooperative societies in transforming India, and especially in transforming India's agriculture. So I've already covered the basic facts about International Cooperative Alliance. If you haven't attended the session, please go back and watch that again, or please read a little more about International Cooperative Alliance. Now, at this conference, we had invited Bhutan's Prime Minister Tshering Togbe. Bhutan's PM has promoted the Gelephu Mindfulness City project as a cooperative project. Now, this is another key point that we can take away from this article. The Gelephu Mindfulness City project is an ambitious project promoted by Bhutan. It's a brand new smart city that Bhutan is building close to the Indian border. It would focus on innovation, research, services, and fintech industry and promote economic opportunities for Bhutan. And India is an active supporter of this massive project of Bhutan. So Bhutan's PM has said the Gelephu Mindfulness City project is a cooperative project because it includes the people of Bhutan as the stakeholders. The people are coming together to focus on this zero carbon city. In line with its climate commitments, environmental commitments, Bhutan will ensure that this new smart city will not contribute to emissions. It would only focus on non-polluting industries like services, IT, fintech, research, etc. And India is a key supporter, and we are investing in the project to build the airport and the new city with the industrial corridor at Gelephu. We are even setting up a railway link to connect India directly with Gelephu city in Bhutan, which is coming up. Now, can you find out this rail corridor and mention which city does it connect with in India? Gelephu in Bhutan is being connected with an Indian city, right? So please find out which is this location and what is this rail corridor which India is setting up. Coming to the last article for today, in the supplement page of the science section, there is a mention of a telescope, the MACE telescope, which was recently inaugurated at the Hanle Observatory in Ladakh. It's a very, very important article for your prelims. The MACE telescope stands for Major Atmospheric Cherenkov Experiment. Please write down the expansion of MACE. It's an acronym. Major Atmospheric Cherenkov Experiment. This is a gamma ray telescope which can observe the cosmic gamma rays which are emitted by celestial bodies. It's a gamma ray telescope which has been set up at the Hanle Space Observatory in Ladakh, which is managed by the Indian Institute of Astrophysics along with other scientific institutions. So this telescope will help us in understanding the role of gamma rays. It will give insight into the universe, into the cosmos by studying the gamma ray emissions. It will help us understand more about celestial bodies like pulsars and blazars. It will track the gamma ray emissions coming from beyond the Milky Way and help us in understanding the universe, the formation of the universe. It will mainly look at gamma rays with more than 20 billion electric volt of energy, and it will even explore a class of hypothetical dark matter particles. So this advanced telescope, a gamma ray telescope, has been inaugurated a few months ago at Hanle in Ladakh. So please make a note of these basic facts. So this concludes my discussion for today. I hope all of you have enjoyed the session, understood all the key points, and you can join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code where I'll be sharing the PDF with some updates on current affairs. So if you guys have liked the session, do let me know by pressing the like button. Also share your comments and answer the questions that I've asked in the session so that it becomes more interactive. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.